сносили на Украине памятник Ленину. Это у них декоммунизация называется.
Vladimir Putin was born on October 7, 1952, in the city of Leningrad, a historic city in the Soviet Union that today is known as St. Petersburg. The city still carried deep scars from the Second World War. Less than a decade before Putin was born, Leningrad experienced a brutal siege by Nazi troops for nearly 900 days. The event killed more than 1 million people and left the city in extremely difficult conditions. Many families lived with severe limitations and had to rebuild their lives from the beginning. Putin's family was part of a generation that grew up in the shadow of those difficult times. His father, Vladimir Spiridonovich Putin, was a war veteran who had been wounded while fighting against German forces. His mother, Maria Ivanovna Putina, worked hard to keep her family alive. They lived in a typical Soviet communal apartment where several families shared a kitchen, bathroom, and common space. Life like this made children who grew up there learn from an early age about competition, discipline, and how to survive in a harsh environment. Putin himself later said that his childhood in that environment shaped his mentality. He learned that respect does not come by itself, but must be earned. As a young boy, Putin was not always a standout student in class. However, he was known for having strong determination and a desire to prove himself. In his teenage years, he discovered a strong interest in martial arts, especially judo. In this sport, he learned about balance, strategy, and self-control. Judo is not only about physical strength, but about reading an opponent and using momentum intelligently. These values are often mentioned as part of Putin's life philosophy.
Deep, authoritative, and calm. Besides sports, he also had an interest in the world of intelligence. At that time, the most famous intelligence agency in the Soviet Union was the KGB, an organization that had a strong reputation for protecting state security. For many people, the KGB was a symbol of Soviet state power. The young Putin began to imagine himself one day working in that world. His desire was not just an empty dream. He began to make a clear plan about how to achieve it. After finishing high school, Putin continued his education at Leningrad University and majored in law. Studying law gave him an understanding of the state system as well as the structure of government. During his college years, he continued to train in judo and was known as a disciplined and focused person. In 1975, after completing his studies, the opportunity he had been waiting for finally arrived. Putin was recruited by the KGB. Joining the KGB was not easy. The organization was extremely selective and demanded high loyalty from every member. Putin went through intensive training designed to shape intelligence agents capable of working under high pressure. After several years of service, he was eventually assigned to East Germany, a country that at the time was under strong Soviet influence. In the city of Dresden, he worked as an intelligence officer, tasked with gathering information and monitoring political activities in the region. However, the world he knew slowly began to change. In the late 1980s, the political system of the Soviet Union began to weaken. Across Eastern Europe, waves of political change began to appear. And when the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, history entered a new chapter. Putin witnessed firsthand how a power that had seemed solid for decades began to collapse. This event not only changed the future of Europe, but also changed the direction of his own life.
When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, the world entered a period of massive change that had previously been unimaginable. For Vladimir Putin, who at that time was serving as an intelligence officer in the city of Dresden in East Germany, the event became a defining moment. In a short time, the political system that had appeared strong for decades began to collapse. Across Eastern European countries, communist governments lost power and societies demanded change. For many Soviet intelligence agents stationed abroad, this situation created enormous uncertainty. They watched as the influence of the Soviet Union slowly faded in regions that had once been under its control. When the Soviet Union was officially dissolved in 1991, a massive country that had once been one of the world's superpowers suddenly disappeared from the global political map. For millions of people inside it, the event brought both confusion and new hope. However, the transition toward a new system was not easy. Russia, which became the main successor of the Soviet Union, faced a severe economic crisis, high inflation, and extremely rapid political change. In the middle of that situation, Vladimir Putin decided to return to his hometown of St. Petersburg. After returning to Russia, Putin began entering the world of civilian government. He worked under the mayor of St. Petersburg at that time, Anatoly Sobchak, a political figure known as a reformer. At first, Putin's tasks were mostly related to administrative affairs and the city's international relations. However, the experience gave him a new understanding of how politics and economics worked in a changing Russia. Putin was known as someone who worked with great discipline and rarely attracted public attention. He did not speak much, but he was known for completing tasks efficiently.
During several years working in city government, Putin began building a reputation as an official who could be trusted. In the competitive world of Russian politics, trust often becomes a very important factor. In the mid-1990s, his career began moving to the national level. In 1996, he moved to Moscow to work in the administration of the Russian president at the time, Boris Yeltsin. This step placed him closer to the center of state power. In Moscow, Putin's career developed quite rapidly. Within a few years, he held several important positions in the government. In 1998, he was appointed head of the Federal Security Service, or FSB, the institution that was the successor of the KGB. This position gave him major influence within the national security system. With an intelligence background and a reputation as a firm individual, Putin began to be known among the Russian political elite. The following year became the biggest turning point in his life. In 1999, President Boris Yeltsin appointed Putin as the Prime Minister of Russia. At that time, many Russian citizens were still not very familiar with him. However, the country's political situation was heating up because of conflict in the Chechnya region. Putin took a tough stance against separatist groups and emphasized that the state must remain united. This stance caused his popularity to rise rapidly among people who wanted stability. Then, on December 31, 1999, a surprising decision was announced. President Boris Yeltsin suddenly resigned from his position. In his national speech, he appointed Vladimir Putin as acting president until the next election. This decision immediately transformed Putin's position from a government official into the leader of the largest country in the world. A few months later, in March 2000, Russia held a presidential election. Vladimir Putin won the election and officially became the president of the Russian Federation. In less than a decade, a former intelligence agent who had previously been almost unknown to the international world had now reached the peak of Russian political power. However, for Putin himself, this presidency was not the end of the journey. Rather, it was the beginning of a long effort to reshape the future direction of his country. When Vladimir Putin officially became the president of Russia in 2000, the country was still in an unstable condition. 1 decade after the collapse of the Soviet Union, Russia faced many major problems, from economic crises, weakening state institutions, to the decline of Russia's influence on the international stage. Many citizens felt that their country had lost the power it once had. It was at that moment that Putin began building his image as a leader who would restore stability and the strength of the state. One of Putin's main focuses at the beginning of his administration was strengthening the role of the central government again. During the 1990s, many regions in Russia had very large authority, making it difficult for the central government to control policies across different areas. Putin then implemented various political reforms that made power more centralized in Moscow again. This step helped strengthen state control and created a more stable governmental structure. In the economic sector, Russia in the early 2000s began to experience significant growth. One of the main factors was the rising prices of oil and natural gas in global markets. These two resources indeed became the backbone of the Russian economy. With increasing revenue, the government was able to stabilize the country's financial condition, reduce debt, and improve living standards for some of the population. Many Russian citizens saw this period as a time when their country began to rise again after the difficult decade before. However, Putin's leadership did not only focus on domestic affairs. On the international stage, he tried to restore Russia's position as a major world power. Putin often emphasized that Russia must be respected as a sovereign country with its own interests. In various foreign policies, Russia began taking a firmer stance in facing Western countries. This caused relations between Russia and several Western nations to frequently experience tension, especially on issues of security and geopolitics.
Domestically, Putin's leadership style is known to be very disciplined and controlled. He rarely shows emotion openly and often presents an image as a strong leader. Russian media frequently show various physical activities performed by Putin, such as practicing judo, riding horses in the wild, or exploring remote regions of the country. This image helped shape the picture of him as a tough and energetic leader. As time passed, Putin's influence in Russian politics grew even greater. For more than 2 decades, he has remained the most dominant figure in the government, both as president and as prime minister. The Russian political system has also undergone several changes that allow him to continue playing a central role in the leadership of the country. This has led many analysts to describe Putin as one of the most influential leaders in modern Russian history. On the global level, Russia's policies during Putin's era often attract worldwide attention. Every strategic decision taken by the Russian government has major impacts on international relations and geopolitical dynamics. His supporters see Putin as a leader who successfully restored Russia's strength and national pride. However, critics argue that some of his policies have also triggered tensions with other countries. Regardless of those debates, one thing that cannot be denied is the extraordinary life journey of Vladimir Putin. From a boy who grew up in a modest communal apartment in Leningrad to becoming the leader of the largest country in the world, his journey reflects the major transformations that occurred in Russia over the past several decades. And until today, the name Putin remains one of the most influential figures in global politics of the 21st century.